In October of 1972, a plane carrying 45 people, mostly young rugby players and their loved ones, vanished into one of the most unforgiving landscapes on Earth. For 72 days, 16 survivors battled cold, starvation, isolation, and the limits of the human spirit itself. This is the extraordinary story of Flight 571, a story of tragedy, of courage, and of the unbreakable will to live. The Team and the Dream. The Old Christians Club was a close-knit Uruguayan rugby team, energetic, disciplined, cheerful. Many were barely 20 years old. For them, a planned match in Santiago, Chile, wasn't just a game. It was an adventure with friends, family, and a chance to see the world differently. Among the passengers were Nando Parado, strong, charming, athletic; Roberto Canessa, medical student, sharp and thoughtful; Marcelo Perez, team captain, natural leader; mothers, friends, siblings. They boarded Uruguayan Air Force Flight 571, a military Fairchild plane. No one imagined they were heading toward one of the most iconic survival stories in human history. The flight into danger. The journey began smoothly, but to reach Chile, the plane had to cross the monstrous, jagged wall of mountains known as the Andes, peaks rising more than 22,000 feet into the sky. The pilots believed they had passed the highest mountains and began descending toward what they thought was Chilean airspace. But they were wrong, dead wrong. A navigational error of only a few minutes placed them deep inside the mountains, not beyond them. The plane was descending straight into a maze of ice and rock. The crash. At 3:34 p.m., the right wing ripped away, then the left. The tail snapped off, sending passengers hurtling into the sky. With no wings, the fuselage rocketed downhill like a sled, smashing into snow and rock at terrifying speed. When the grinding stopped, miraculously, 33 of the 45 passengers were alive. But the scene was horrific. Broken legs, crushed chests, frostbitten skin, people screaming for loved ones who would never answer. Night fell over the Andes, and the survivors realized they were stranded at 11,500 feet in the heart of one of the coldest places on Earth. Trapped in the killing cold. The fuselage became their shelter, a metal coffin lying on its side, torn open at the back. With no blankets, no warm clothing, no tools, no water, and almost no food, the survivors faced temperatures plunging to minus 30 degrees Celsius, or minus 22 degrees Fahrenheit. They melted snow on metal scraps to drink. They rationed a few chocolate bars, tiny jars of jam, some bottles of wine. Everything else the plane carried was gone. Yet they clung to hope. They believed rescue teams would arrive within hours, maybe a day. They were wrong. A hope that dies. After 8 brutal days, someone found a small radio receiver in luggage. They gathered around it, desperate, praying for good news. Instead, they heard the message that shattered their world. The search for the missing Fairchild plane has been called off. Silence, shock, then sobbing filled the fuselage. There would be no rescue, no helicopters, no help. They were alone. The most difficult decision. With food gone, their bodies shrinking, their energy fading, the survivors faced a reality no human wants to confront. There was only one possible source of nutrition: the bodies of their deceased friends preserved in the snow. This decision broke them emotionally. Many prayed for guidance. Some refused at first, others wept while trying. But hunger is merciless, and eventually, the moral barrier gave way to the instinct to stay alive. This wasn't savagery, it was a tragic acceptance of what survival demanded. The avalanche. On the night of day 17, a massive avalanche thundered down the mountain and buried the fuselage. 8 more survivors were killed instantly or suffocated under tons of snow. The remaining group was trapped in pitch blackness for 3 days. The air grew foul. People passed out. The cold became unbearable. This tragedy shattered morale, but it also created a new determination. If we don't get out, we die here. The leaders emerge. Leadership crystallized in the darkest moments. Marcelo Perez, the team captain, kept order and discipline. Roberto Canessa, the medical student, became the group's medic. Nando Parrado, thought to be dying after the crash, rose as a beacon of hope. Nando lost his mother and sister in the crash, yet he became the strongest physically and emotionally. He refused to let despair take over. With Canessa, he began planning the impossible, a trek across the Andes to get help. Preparing for the impossible. There was no equipment, so the survivors began to make their own. A sleeping bag, stitched from insulation and cloth, snowshoes fashioned from seat cushions, gloves made from spare clothing, rope woven from electrical cables. For days, they sealed cracks in the fuselage, rationed food, and trained by climbing nearby hills. They knew the trek would be deadly, but staying meant certain death. The 10-day journey over death. On December 12th, Nando Parrado and Carlos Roberto Canessa set off with teammate Antonio Vicentin. The plan: climb to the west, reach Chile. But they were surrounded by walls of ice, a landscape so brutal that even trained mountaineers avoid it. They climbed 14,000 to 15,000 foot peaks through biting winds, with no protection from the sun, sleeping on snow, carrying only scraps of food. At one point, Nando reached the top of a towering peak and saw mountains stretching endlessly into the horizon. No valleys, no Chile, just ice. Anyone else might have broken, but Nando said, "We are already dead. Let's keep walking." Vicentin turned back to conserve food. Canessa and Parrado pushed on, their bodies failing, their lips bleeding, their legs trembling. They kept walking. The miracle encounter. On day 10 of their trek, starving and near collapse, the 2 men spotted something moving far below, a man on horseback. His name was Sergio Catalan, a Chilean muleteer. From across a roaring river, he shouted in Spanish, "¿De dónde vienen?" "Where do you come from?" Nando shouted back, "De un avión que cayó en las montañas." From a plane that crashed in the mountains. Catalan threw bread and a pen tied to paper across the river. Nando wrote, "I come from a plane that crashed in the mountains. There are still 14 injured survivors." The next morning, Catalan rode for hours to alert the authorities. Rescue was finally coming. The rescue. On December 22nd and 23rd, helicopters flew toward the crash site. The survivors heard the blades. They screamed, waved, cried, ran through the snow. After 72 days of unimaginable suffering, 16 survivors were finally brought home. Their emaciated faces shocked the world. Their story of courage, tragedy, and unbreakable will to live captivated it. Aftermath and controversy. Immediately, the world asked about the unthinkable decisions the survivors had made. Many expected condemnation. Instead, families embraced them. A mother said, If my son had died, I would have wanted his body to save his friends. The survivors were not judged as monsters, but understood as brave young men who did what was necessary. Flight 571 is more than a survival story. It is a testament to what humans can endure, how deeply they can care for one another,
and how far we will go when life demands the impossible. 16 young men walked out of the Andes alive, not because they were the strongest, but because they refused to stop fighting. Their journey reminds us that even in the most desolate place on earth, the human spirit burns bright.